We're discussing the role of data architecture, the outputs, the data model, the data value chain, and data flows. Just considering the LinkedIn advert and the build up to the session, and considering the title, if you wouldn't mind just please jotting down some expectations that you may have in your mind in thinking about this afternoon's discussion. So I'll just give a few minutes. If you can please type that into Menti, and that as feedback, so that it also helps us steer the session. And obviously I'd like to try and answer as many of the expected questions or thoughts or ideas, or talk about them at least through the session. And we'd get your feedback at the end as well if we've met all of those. So please enter the detail there. Right, and while people are filling in those, just maybe a bit of feedback, or also a bit of context from where I'm coming from. We've been enjoying a study group, a CDMP fundamental study group, where we're reviewing all the chapters from the DMBOK. And currently we've completed chapter 6, and we're about to embark on chapter 7, data security. And something that's evident out of the session so far, Howard, is although the DMBOK is very thorough, it gives great frameworks, processes, helps us understand the different roles, inputs, as I said, processes and outputs in terms of context in the different domains. I think some of the questions that come out through the group sessions is how to actually do this, and how to tie that back to my business. And I think that's a key question as well. Is yes, data management is key, data management is exciting and all of this, and it's definitely a supporter of business. But sometimes there's a little gap between data management as a practice and connecting back to the business, so that data management can actually prove its value back to business as well. So there's just something there that I'd like to put on the table.
Yeah, so I'd like to add to that, Paul. The DMBOK makes itself quite clear that it's there to answer two questions: the why and the what. And I'm not convinced it does a fantastic job on the why, but it goes to that, right? So if you see business drivers, then it's starting to challenge why we got to do it. So there's that part of it, but the what needs to be done is great. But you'll notice, for example, techniques are a little bit lacking. So when I talk about these deliverables of data flow, data value chain, enterprise data model, there's not a lot of detail. Now, that's sort of understandable, because there isn't one way to do a data value chain or to build an enterprise data model. You can have many. And so there'll be lots of contention within the data management industry to say, well, what's the right way to do it? And that techniques box can then explode to whatever, so they're trying to reduce dependencies, or how does one say, almost favoring certain techniques.
Sure. No, I agree with that, and happy with that. I just think, sometimes for those that are entering, maybe the guys that are quite young in data management, don't always have extensive experience in using different techniques. Right. And I just think to ramp up nicely and quickly, because I'm a proponent of, let's take what we're learning, let's hook it onto something practical or an example, and then also run back with excitement back to our business and say, hey guys, this is what we can do now, So
I agree.
100%. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks everybody for the contributions so far. Please keep adding as we go through. So let's just talk through some of these. So we'll maybe just read through for everybody's benefit. So some better understanding, absolutely, what the DMBOK says about data architecture. Let's look at practical use of the DNM framework, enhanced knowledge base regarding data and other related knowledge areas, role of the data architect related to, e.g., data modeling and data lineage, and role between architect and perhaps the actual person doing the modeling. Very good. The role data policies play in the data management process. Are they still relevant? New to listening to you, curious what others are thinking about for data governance in context of architecture. Great. As I think that's just confirming we really like some interaction and commentary. So please, Howard, I know doesn't mind people interrupting or putting their hands up. I'll be watching the chat box as well. So please, if you want to load a question there, that's fine. I'll interrupt Howard and ask the question. And yeah, Howard, thanks. I don't know if anybody has an opening question other than these that they've been documented here. Not at the moment. Okay. Excellent.
All right. So I brought along my friendly DMBOK trainer, who's on mute at the moment, but what I would like her to do is I think she does a great job in terms of introducing the context diagram. So we just ask Veronica to just take us through at a high level what data architecture is all about. I know Veronica goes into a lot more detail in terms of data governance, but let's just get an understanding of, let's explain to the people what DMBOK is saying about data architecture. Veronica.
Hi, everyone. This context diagram, before I even get onto what I'm saying about architecture, I just want to make sure that everyone knows how to read the context diagram. The context diagram is actually a composite. It's a DMBOK 1. They had a matrix where they put in each cell of they had the knowledge areas, which is the wheel. And for each of those knowledge areas, they applied all of these things: goals, business drivers, technical drivers, activities, inputs and outputs, and all the people involved, and then the tools and techniques. And so they made a matrix, and then they turned the matrix into the context diagram. The context diagram tells us a few things. Apart from giving us the good definition, the DMBOK definition, it tells us the goals, which are why we are approaching this area, what we want to get out of this area. And the business drivers is why the business wants this area, although that's not actually on the context diagram. Then the next blocks here, the inputs, activities, and deliverables. The activities are what the practice is going to do, in this case with data architecture. The participants is who's actually going to be doing it. So that's enterprise data architects and data modelers in this case. But the interesting thing about the activities is you can see there's a little P next to establish data architecture, a little D somewhere down there, and an O, and sadly there isn't one with a C. But what these phases of the activities are is a P is the planning phase. And it helps us to understand which participants are actually going to be doing whatever the activity is. So the P planning phase is the strategic type of person doing that. The D is the data modeler going to be doing the work, actually doing the modeling, and the architect and the modeler doing the work. And so that's the sort of tactical type of thing. The O is operational, which is the ongoing embedding of this enterprise architecture into the business. And then the activity, control and oversight, which is where the data governance people get involved in that knowledge area as well. For these activities, we've got inputs and then the deliverables. Now our inputs here, can you see the top input is enterprise architecture? Enterprise architecture comprises of the business architecture, the data architecture, application architecture, and the technology architecture. So we will have done some business architecture design before we start doing the data architecture. So there's business architecture there. Now the business, data architecture then is going to do is taking the business requirements of data and formulating for our data for the organization, what business needs to support its operations. Then we've got IT standards and goals. If we've got any already, IT will have set some standards. Enterprise architecture reinforces these standards. So once we have enterprise architecture, all our naming conventions and all of that kind of thing has to line up with the the enterprise data architecture. And then data strategies. And data strategy is something that comes out of data governance. Data governance will work out what data the business requires, and that goes as input to formulate our enterprise data architecture. So you can see how the inputs are going into the activities, and then outputs will come. Data architecture, I'm sure Howard's going to talk more about it, but you see the deliverables, they're the outputs of all of these activities. They will be inputs to other activities. Possibly data integration and data modeling and those kind of activities. We've got a list of suppliers, a list of consumers. And then right at the bottom are our technical drivers, whatever tools we're going to use, our best practice techniques, and the metrics to show that this area is actually working. Is there anything else? The goals? I did talk about the goals. The goals is why we're going to do it. So there's so much information on the context diagram if you just unpack it. And the nice thing about the context diagram as well, if you're setting up this practice or this it's a very high level checklist to make sure that you've got everything in place.
Okay, so Veronica, I've got a question for you. You noticed that the control and are you saying that data governance doesn't have any control or any governance to data architecture, or is that something missing in the context diagram?
I would say it's missing. Because a data governance has to review and approve all these the artifacts that come out of data architecture. That's data governance's role in this area, is to review and approve.
Sure.
Right. So, and I think there's a few of us around that have experience of enterprise architecture and data governance, and they tend to compete a lot with each other. And it's not an easy thing to say to enterprise architecture that governance is going to control data architecture. Anyone experience that?
I don't know whether that's this control word to me is it's a little problematic. Because governance is supposed to give oversight, not control. They're not in control. They're not the piggy in the middle controlling all. And in the DMBOK, it says enterprise data architecture and the data governance organization must be well aligned. They should have a steward and an architect assigned to each subject area. So they're supposed to collaborate. They're supposed to communicate and work well together. And that's the thing. And that the governance needs to make sure that the data architecture artifacts are lining up with the business. Because we need to be business focused all the way through. And if we get our business data, the data governance gets the data strategy, data architecture takes that, and then it will be aligned with business. And if modeling aligns with architecture, it will be aligned with business, and so on, until we get to data quality, in which case we'll have quality data aligned with business.
Right.
Excellent. Thanks, Veronica. Thanks. Johan's got a question.
I was going to introduce him. He's typically known by everyone as Mr. Question.
Okay.
He questions everything. He never takes anything for granted.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, actually, let me live up to it, Howard. Hi, Veronica. Just a question on the, looking at this whole thing, looking at the consumers. Actually, I only see more technical people in these consumers. Actually, what about business people? Is it not in this modern day and age actually good to also draw in the business people with this data architecture, that they can actually see what the data architecture is? Because actually often through the years, IT's got this chip on their shoulder that business does not know anything. But I think in the modern day and age, business people are, because they also read, so they can understand what a data architecture is. So shouldn't they also be part of the consumers, or am I just missing something?
No, you're 100% correct. You're 100% correct, Johan. The fact that we build a data value chain and we want to increase the value of data to business, and almost we're expecting us to add the enhancements to data. They are critical in that.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I guess I'm on the right path. Thanks.
Yeah, you're on the right path. And one of the things we try to say to people is that these context diagrams are not perfect. And there's lots of application to yourself. So use this as a reference diagram and then start to build it out for each organization, which is going to be slightly different.
Yeah. Very good.
True. Well, just my last little 2 cents on it, because I feel definitely the more you involve business people, the better the actually data architecture is going to get a foothold actually within the whole enterprise or the company or whatever.
Yeah, and if you look at the definition up top there, and it's saying align data investments with business strategy. So to do that without having the business consume any of your outputs is I mean, they are suppliers, so we do have subject matter experts supplying information, but and this is always the desire I ask and say to people, why is it that when we walk into business, quite often I see a business process diagram, but I hardly ever see a data landscape or a data model diagram.
True.
And we have to change that. And especially if we are saying, guys, not everything is going to be driven by business process. We're now getting into the land of AI and things like that, where decisions and insights can be made without a process. We can be picking up data externally to us. And so, guys, we're not just business process focused. We are about ensuring that our data is helping us understand what's going on. But we don't see a lot of that visible on the business walls, understanding what decisions they need to make. We just see, okay, you got to do A, B, C, D, but that's a hangover. I think we starting to realize that data is the one that's starting to drive. But previously, it's all been about applications, business processes, and things like that.
Okay. Yes, and I agree with you there. It's fine, and definitely we need the business processes because there is the underlying knowledge that you get from your business process with your data. But with machine learning and AI and things like that, there could be very actually strategic kind of decisions that leaders want to make, which has got nothing really to do with the business process. It's got to do with data and information and what the company need. So that's yes. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions except Johan? Because then we will probably not get through the talk. Okay.
Great.
Arthur, how are you doing? I know you sometimes you feel that academic or theoretical dump. Now we're trying to make it a lot more practical. Yep. How do you see it?
No, I'm quite okay. I'm just following the discussion.
Okay. All right. Great. So make sure you're listening. Otherwise I'm going to pick on you every now and again. Okay. Fantastic. Veronica, have you completed? Are you comfortable?
I think so.
Okay.
If there's anything else, you can pick on me again.
Okay, great. Excellent.
It's a good start, and then you can build on that.
Very good.
Paul, on your side?
No, I'm good. I'm just waiting, chomping at the bit. I've got a few practical things I'd like to ask, but let's go.
All right. Okay, great. So what I've really liked and appreciated in the last week, 2 weeks, where and I sort of echo what Paul is saying is whenever we do something, it's got to go back to business. We got to show the value. So I always like to start these discussions about if I'm going to do something, right? If I'm going to create a data flow, what is the benefit back to business? Because they're going to be paying for this, right? They pay for all of our work, all the work we're doing as IT. They're the ones who are funding it. And so whenever we put something together, like an enterprise data model, a data value chain, and a data lineage and flow, we have to demonstrate value. So what is the benefit back to value? And I think if there's anything that I'd like to coach you guys on is to say, if you can't show that you're delivering some form of benefit to business, I think you need to ask yourself and go back to understanding why you're doing this. Now, lately, we've seen a lot of data lineage and data flows almost being demanded by things like protecting and controlling your assets. Okay, and I'd be quite interested in just having a quick poll here in terms of how many of you that have data architects, do they come to you with a data flow diagram of all the data moving through your organization? Now, I think you will certainly see it on financial services that have to belong to BCBS 239 who have to report. But other than that, how many of you guys are able to go to an architect and say, where does this data come from? Where does it move along the journey? And where does it end? And what is the end result? Do we send it to anybody? So do I have a risk of distributing wrong information to external parties? Anybody, in terms of just putting their hands up, be able to say that they know and they have architects within their organization that provide them with that information?
I could say just Johan, but I think that's the old hand.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to work out. Johan, is that old on you? Okay.
Other than that, no one. Sure.
Okay, so that's fascinating, and that's great because that's the area I want to address today. After our discussion on papaya yesterday, we want to go through some of these questions. But then if we look at the next one, so does everyone understand what data lineage and data flow is? Is there anyone that doesn't understand it? Okay, so we
Maybe
all.
I'm actually sorry, Howard. Can I just interrupt? I raised my hand, but then I was muted, so I was talking to myself.
Okay.
Excuse me. Okay, can I just quickly actually interject on that last question? Okay, because all right, actually, I've worked as both as just a data model and a modeler and a data architect. While working as a data modeler, I can tell you now that from the whatever data architect in the company there was no lineage, no nothing,
Yeah.
no enterprise data architecture model, nothing like that done. When I was a data architect, well, I did do it, okay, because right. I know you have to do it. So at least as a data architect, if I fulfill that role, I know that is one of the most important things. And actually, even as a data modeler, the first things I really try to ask the company is, we need to look at the data lineage. We can't just go and go on your tangent and do all these things, but there's no lineage. It's just a few models and a few mapping, and that's it. Okay, you have to have lineage. So okay, true.
And I think that's great. And I'd like to just address a point, because there was an expectation raised about understanding the difference between a data architect and a data modeler. And maybe, Veronica, this is you on the spot again. Could you give a brief summary of the difference between the two?
Sure, I hope so. The architect is looking at the enterprise data landscape, the model is different in that it's modeled as subject areas, so business subject areas. The enterprise data, the highest level enterprise data model, is a conceptual model of the entities being business subject areas. So it shows how all the data of the business fits together, and how the data flows through the different business subject areas. Now, a data model, that a modeler would be doing, is actually for an application. Yeah. It's going to be answering some kind of business solution. The business needs a new package to voice customers or something like that, just a package or an application. And
Right.
the database structure for that, the data that supports this application is what the modeler works with.
Right. Okay, so the only slight difference to that is if you have a data modeler that's working on a master data project, and then they would be quite involved in looking at the data across the organization. But typically, you're 100% correct. The architect looks at ensuring, and let's go back, ensuring this ability to guide data integration and provide the blueprints. So they're not there, they're there to get harmony of data across the organization. They're not there to actually deliver business applications, but they're there to give a starting point and a way that's going to keep consistency across the organization. Okay, so if we keep coming back and we start talking through that, we see that one of the goals of the business drivers is to design structures and plans to meet current and long-term requirements of the enterprise. Okay, so this is where the architects are not focused on the here and now, and I have to deliver a model for this application. And that's also, it's a narrow view, because sometimes you have to build an application that's going to try to last forever, like a master data system, but let's not twist it to that depth. The architect is the one who needs to ensure that the data and the designs of the data are consistent across all areas. And what's not always visible in things like this is that you'll see that the architects are also responsible for the enterprise taxonomy and even the ontology and to an extent some of the terminology, the business terms. And Veronica used the business subject area, and Steve Hoberman is now calling the subject area and the conceptual the business term model. So this is where I show the outcomes, is that the enterprise data model makes sure that we have agreed the business terms. We are enforcing the business rules consistently across all applications. Our business solutions are operationalized. So he's taking enterprise data models that are, a lot of the times they are derived from an industry model, and they build it for the specific organization. And then they'll look in terms of what's happening in the industry and saying, well, do we need some of that in this organization? And then introduce it. And then they want to ensure that it goes into the enterprise. And that's this level over here, which says manage enterprise requirements within projects. Okay, so that's part of the software development cycle, the data development cycle. They are trying to convert requirements and entities and concepts that are in the enterprise data model, and they're trying to get them into the project. And there's some nice areas over there in terms of compliance ratios, and then it's also a scenario of coverage, and are we covering all the concept models? Okay, so that's what the key role of the enterprise data model is. Making sure we got the blueprints, we don't have blank pages for the data model, you got a place to start, it relates to the industry and where the industry is, it gets common agreement on terms, and you guys all know that, how hard that is from a business glossary point of view, business rules and business solutions. So the last point I want to add there is what I do for the business glossary when I work with my data stewards, and my quality check on a business glossary is a conceptual model. So are the business terms, can we express the business terms and their relationships in a conceptual model, and does it make sense to the business with the appropriate rules in terms of cardinality? Am I going into too much detail?
So just a quick one, in terms of that example that I briefly mentioned about cataloging, business catalogs for sites, utility sites with that has a spares requirement.
Yes.
And there's some, at this point, there's a problem statement there where the spares required for all the sites are mostly common, but the business seems to have a catalog of spares per site. and all numbered differently or versioned differently, and therefore there's its impact on procurement, because potentially they're buying the same spares at the same supplier but getting different pricing because they're not recognized in the same way. And then it's is this where this fits in, where you bring it back to that model to say,
I understand, and that's a good question, Paul. The main control around these different pricing would sit in reference data and master data. That's where the main control would be, to have a single authoritative source. Okay. Now, the enterprise data model lays down the business rules in terms of there can only be one price for all sites. And you may find that they haven't laid those rules down strictly enough to say that the relationship between pricing and sites, almost when we read the data model or the master data model, or maybe they don't have a master data model, they're allowing the sites to dictate pricing, which then causes all sorts of hassles. So the answer is yes, an enterprise data model that contains the business rules that are consistently enforced will then prevent that from happening. But the real, where the rubber hits the road, remember, because that's all model, right? So it's all nice, fluffy stuff at the top level, but it's not operationalized. You can't make an enterprise data model an application. You have to go and build a master data application, which will then ensure that you don't have, that the rules are enforced, and ensure that you don't have duplicate pricing or different pricing.
I got you. Okay.
Howard, and then how then does the logical model come into play? Because I don't.
So I love this question, and I always try to help people make a differentiation between these different levels. So I always present the conceptual model. I refer to that as the business need. The conceptual model is an expression of the business need with a level of associations between the elements. The logical model expresses the business solution, and the physical model expresses the technical solution. So how is it going to be implemented? And it's up to the data architect and the data governance person to ensure that when you have an enterprise data model, when someone designs a master data model, they should be aligned with the enterprise data model and they enforce the rules consistently. So who signs off the master data model? Well, it should be the data architect that has provided them with a blueprint. And so they can easily see, the business rule on my model says that you can only have one price across the organization. And you, Mr. Data Model, are saying the sites can have their own prices. Who's right? Who's got this? And then what the architect would do is say, well, let's go back to the business requirement that you got this thing from, allowing each site to have a different price. And then they would confirm it, understand it. What would then happen is that the architect, if they're wrong, they need to feed back to the enterprise data model. And you can see here on this diagram that a data model, a modeler, is also a participant in building the artifact. So they can help in building the enterprise data model, and we call it backfilling. So you'll find that in some cases you've got no industry model. Then what you'll do is you've got application models, and you'll go and harvest the application models and bring them back into a enterprise data model. Does that answer your question, Arthur?
Yep. I just missed the second part. You said that the conceptual is a business need and the logical was the
business solution.
Solution, okay, yes.
So now you're getting down to the attributes. You've actually got the solution as far as the business is concerned for that domain.
Okay.
Now, what the nice thing about that logical level is that it can be translated into many physical representations. So the logical could go down into a JSON document. The logical could go down into an ER design. A logical could go down into a document database or a knowledge graph database. But the business solution stays the business solution. It can't be overwritten by any physical implementation.
Hmm.
So
So
this
it doesn't
logical
matter where.
models,
Sorry?
is this where you will have your data modelers playing in, right?
Yes, so now we can, and this is quite an exciting development that's happening, because in some cases you've got 2-week sprints. What is happening, when I went to the San Diego conference, what started happening was that people are installing the data modeling tools on production. Now, how's that, right? Previously, we've never heard of a data modeling tool in production. Now what's happening is the data has been stored in things like JSON. The data modeling tool will go and interrogate what's in the JSON document and will build a data model from the JSON document. And then you start to get an understanding of, is it in line with our industry model, or have we got new rules that we never saw?
Sure. Thanks, Howard.
Okay. All right. So let's keep going. So there I've explained the requirement or what the enterprise data model is. I've explained the outcome, and the business benefit is, of course, we've got alignment within the organization. So we've just dealt with Paul's problem of saying all these different sites have different business definitions. Fantastic. We've dealt with it. We've given them business. We've given them value, sorry, and benefits. The other one is this integration of data. And what I'm saying here is when you get standardized rules and things like that, and you want to move data and share data between departments, the worst thing is to have a data set that arrives in business and they don't understand it and they can't understand it and it's not in line with their rules. And they're using different terminology and they're using all sorts of different stuff. In one of the organizations I do work for, there was a comment by one of the business people that it takes a business person, in some cases, up to 3 months to understand the data that they want to share between departments. Now, which company can have a dedicated SME, an expert, trying to make sense of the data that it got from another department, just so that it can link and help drive some of the questions and decisions that the other department needs? Now, that's not data sharing. You know, that's spend most of the time wrangling the data and trying to get it into a shape that people can make sense of. Any questions, comments? Esty?
Because I'm the other person that asks a bunch of questions. I think it would be like great if like there's just more data models in the world in general. We would just understand it better. Yeah. So I'm a fan.
Okay.
Howard, before you proceed, I mean, I'm trying to think here. So because most organizations now are moving into this platform business, so it means that the siloed approach is sort of falling away. So with this data integration, so because obviously at some point they would actually need to create one value chain of different products. So you can't actually say that if in HR and all that. So all those old structures are beginning to sort of wither away. So now how then is it going to actually to affect the existing enterprise model?
Right. So I think what you're saying, and just confirm if I'm right, you are saying that with applications like SAP and also the cloud, because we're all in one system, there's already a level of integration, and you're right.
Yes.
So, but I'll share with you an interesting story. Steve Hoberman did a lot of work for SAP, and he started discovering non-aligned fields between the different components of SAP. And he then went back to SAP, and they actually employed him to develop a conceptual model. And he then presented this finding back to the business. And some of the business people said for the first time they can understand all the data that SAP is looking after. So sometimes we assume that these big applications are doing the job for us, but a lot of the times they're not. That's the one side. the other side is you'll still have really best of breed applications like Salesforce that knock the socks off the business people, and they can't dictate SAP. And you're still going to have a level of movement of data between these different areas. I don't think SAP does a great job in terms of marketing. Its focus is on ERP, but you'll still find that Salesforce does a fantastic job in areas that SAP doesn't. So there'll always be this level of integration from there, and then also into your data warehouse and reporting platform. But you are right. It's the problem is less when you have the single applications.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I know Christine was asking a question.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that one of my questions was, what's the consequence of not having a data architect, visibility and practice in the business? I come from a people perspective, so one of the things I experienced was the politics between the data modeler, the business, and the data architect. And the enterprise architects of this particular client were like a law unto their own, and they were not business centric, or they weren't really interested in what the business wanted. They were building their own little empire.
Right.
You know who I'm talking about, Howard. And and I found it very difficult to kind of get them to align and understand the value of each other and pull together rather than pull apart. So one of my questions was, what is the consequence of not having a data architecture practice in the business so that I could sell the value? But this slide, just from that perspective, is very valuable because I can see in the benefits column, there's the case for change for the different levels of the different outputs. So it answers that question. And I just wanted to mention that this picture is very, very valuable.
Yes, and it's almost the elevator speech that architects should be able to convince business of where they're delivering benefit, what value are they doing, and they should be able to say, guys, you can see the hassles we've got with misaligned operations, that we're not integrating the data, that we have different business rules. These should be on the tips of their tongues, that when they talk to the CEO or the head of IT or whatever it is, they should be able to talk to these benefits and talk to the reasons why we're not getting there. Now, Christine, to go back to your earlier point, the data architects and architects suffer from a similar problem to that of data governance, where a lot of the times their focus is on about the alignment. You have to be in line, and then the control kicks in and the dealing with the business needs goes out the door. And so now it's all about you got to be in line. And we have this challenge where they're so busy trying to get all the herding the cats and chickens and ducks in line that they become intolerant of deviations or what the business needs are. So it's that ongoing thing where people are trying to enforce rules and standards because they've seen the problem, but the guys down the bottom there, they've got a 2-week sprint, and it's, guys, don't tell me that I can miss this deliverable. I must miss it because you have a special rule. The business people want the functionality, and so that demand to deliver, in some cases, takes away this thing of being consistent because it's what I need here and now. Now, what I like to do is in helping the data modelers is to say, guys, be clear when you start with the data modeling. Is this project for a here and now? That means I got to get it done now, and I have to have this thing running because it's a business requirement. And if that's the case, well, then data architect, please back off because we have to deliver this for the business. Or let's make a note of it and we'll see how we bring it right a little bit later on. Or data architect, please get involved so that you help them deliver. So we tend not to operate in that mode, and the architects think everything must be aligned with everything, and then all of a sudden the worlds just disconnect. Johan.
Actually, Howard, just to reiterate and just reiterate, sorry, on what you said. The problem, well, that's just my opinion. Actually, when it comes to the agile world, is where these stories are planned. Actually, I've found or I've seen where, while I do agree with you, the architect cannot push back, but actually, I think the architect just needs to be involved in a certain extent to those stories being planned, because then then you won't have these this friction and something like that, because then at least the architect can say, hey, wait a minute, actually, you can't just put this story in because there is a lot of gaps in here which I can already see. So look at your story. And that pushes the onus back on the Scrum Master and the people actually, to actually go ahead and look at everything.
And isn't that the key of some of the agile stuff is and it's not to overdo it, but it's to pick up those challenges before you start sprinting.
Yes, correct.
And so we need to get that alignment in there, and I think agile forces a much better team cohesion, and Christine can talk to that as well, is that agile is all about the team and the team succeeding and not one person or the other. So agile is trying to bring it in, and they just must come in at the right time. So sometimes I find that if the architect's trying to come in during the sprint and not the sprint before the sprint, then they're in collision mode.
Yeah, correct.
Arthur?
No, I'm good. I was just trying to think, because I think I come from a governance background, so I'm compliant. So who then becomes an autonomous function that would actually coordinate everything? Because there has to be a final audit of some sort.
I love your comment, and I'm just putting together a paper for a practice definition for one of my customers, and we call it the assurance policy, and it's about how do we set up that 3-line of defense. Yes. So, who oversees whose work when, and just getting that structure right, and making sure you've got the right policies and the right practices, so that people don't get caught, and they must know before they start what the rules are. What are the rules of the game? Let me play according to the rules. Don't bring the rules after I've done the game. Bring the rules before I play the game. And so that's important in that situation. Christine, any comment from your side on agile teamwork?
Sorry, I was speaking with my mic off. Well, that is quite a long discussion.
I know, and you've got 3 minutes.
Common goals and all working in the same direction. It sounds easy, but often I find that it's political agendas and people don't really understand the context of each player, and especially in an agile team, to bring it together, align, and deliver on a goal that they jointly need to work together on and be collaborative. It's like building little empires and separating. So I think up front, one of the lessons I learned is right up front to embellish the fact that everybody in that team has a very important role to play, and nobody's threatening anybody or stepping in anybody else's shine, is very valuable. Otherwise, it becomes very confusing and very politically charged.
Okay. All right, guys, so I need to pick up a bit. I think Paul spoke too much in the beginning. So let me see if I can just complete this slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so enterprise data model is something we've seen an agreement there. The data lineage and flow is the one, and I'll come back to the data value chain. The data lineage and flow is the outcomes, is that we understand the data the origin and the path. Okay, so we now know where this data is coming from, and what journey it took along the process and what happened to it. And I think that's a critical aspect, is to say, guys, what happened to this data on the journey? And I'm not sure how many of you guys understand this idea of provenance, where what we are saying is, in some cases, with providing us with fraudulent data or fake news, we can't always expect data quality that is almost a reactive view. We can't always expect data quality to detect the fact that we're getting sold a lemon, right? Because it can adhere to all of the things unless you pick up some aspects of data of accuracy. But the art world has told us that even they battle to pick up fraudulent artifacts. Okay, so the way they got around it was not to deal with a complete focus on data quality, but to focus on the people that supply the data. And we all know that we tend to trust people. We don't trust data as much as we trust people. And if we see that we're getting data from someone we trust, already a lot of the barriers are down, and we're more willing to share the data with them and make use of the data. If we see data from people that we don't trust, then we start asking questions. And this is almost when we present insights and facts and that, we should be saying, where is the source of your data? Where did it come from? And do we trust them? So very critical to give business that trust to say, you know what, I got your data from Bloomberg and not Reuters. Now, I was a little bit surprised that when I was having this debate in one of my customers, they said, no. 5-6 years ago, Reuters was giving us really bad data and Bloomberg was ahead. Now the problem's gone away and we trust both. You're still sitting with some managers that when you mention the word Reuters, the walls go up and the blocks come out. So it's perception about who it is, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to actually understand the origin, who created the data. And one could go back to them, and over time you can start building a score to say how much we trust those people. Then the other nice thing about understanding the origin and the path is these two areas over here, timeliness and latency. So the timeliness one means that if I know that I'm the second person in line or the first person in line, I don't need to worry about how up to date my data is. If I'm the third or fourth person in line and each person sitting on it for a day or a week or a month, I've got some problems in terms of my latency. I can just look at the delays that I'm getting when I work through that data. So I then have an identification of, and it's a lot like a value stream model. It's saying, how long does it take before it gets to me? And is it at the right time and the right moment for me to respond and derive the right insights? So if I'm expected to answer what happened in the market last night and the closing price of last night, and I only get it a day later or whatever it is, it's useless. The data is useless. Don't even show me. And we need to be able to ask those scenarios. Now, the other major aspect that I have picked up is the idea of POPI. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of the situation of data processing agreement, which is not the same data sharing, which focuses all about on the processing. And this is what a data lineage and data flow diagram shows you, is saying who processed and what processing took place of the data along the path. And one of the biggest challenges with Papaya and GDPR and things like that is to say, guys, do you know and have you shared this data or the processing of this data in the appropriate mechanism, or have you exposed yourself to risk? And just yesterday, we were talking about a scenario where if we are sharing child data, all right, then before we can even bring the data in, are you aware of the fact that we need to go to the regulator and get prior authorization on sharing of that data? Is anybody aware of that? There should be a couple that listened to the talk yesterday.
Only because I listened to the talk, yeah.
Yeah. But how many of you guys know that if you don't get prior authorization and you just start landing data for children, you got a problem, they can close you down. and you then get civil penalties, and the regulator can come after you. So without this lineage, and I mean, this is not easy, right? So I did a couple of things on my own databases, and I look at the people, and in a lot of cases, I don't have age in there. So I have no clue as to whether I'm dealing with a child or not. Contact information, it's not always, the quality is not always there. So we have these challenges. Okay, so just to close up as quickly as possible, so those who have to go. So you've got an idea of the data lineage and flow. That thing, data processing and Papaya, is all about the movement of data. Yes, it's the content of the data, so it's account numbers, children, employees, data subjects, and things like that. But the biggest penalties and fines come when you start moving the data to the wrong people, getting other people to play with the data and process the data, enhancing the data. So it's the movement of data that's probably the one that's going to get you into most trouble. All right. Now, the data value chain, this is what I find I don't know, and I haven't seen many people knowing this and understanding this, is how do we, so the value of the asset gets better and better in the journey. Now, this is not just for, and you'll see lots of data value chains when you read up on them, it's collect the data, ingest the data, store the data, enhance the data, add certain calculations and stuff like that. It's not that simple. It is about understanding the data to the business and saying, if I just get data about about the population, okay, that's one thing. But I now need to add marketing data to say, well, this person in this thing, now I can allocate a persona to that person. That means I need to know how to sell to that people, the products that are applicable. So there's an enhancement and an uplift of data. So, for example, if I phone up Vodacom and I see this happening in some cases, and I shouldn't be making those comments, but they give me a dump of all the data of their clients, and then we say, well, okay, that's great, but how do we target these people? What are their personas? And when you can allocate personas and you can confirm that this person is a hot lead and not a cold lead, you've already got value. And that's where your data value chain. So it's an important addition to the information to help you answer more questions and make better decisions. Now, the nice thing about this, when we see what insight the data is generating, what we also see at the same time is the identification of data barriers where we're actually losing value of data. And I'm going to pick on someone, and the special person is Esty. Okay, could you give me an example of how we can lose value on data?
Losing value on data.
If we transform data, how could we lose data? Lose value, sorry.
If the end users don't trust the data, so if we change data and they don't trust it anymore, they're not sure what we did with it. So I think that would lose value. Would that be one?
Yeah, so you can actually pick up, for example, the quality checks. If you do the quality checks after the movement and you find out that this has got less quality than the one before, you've actually just destroyed value and you've taken value off the table. Anybody else that's got another technique that loses value?
Isn't it probably the risk associated with processing that data?
Yes, so if we increase the risk by sending it to another party, for example, we can increase the risk, but we do other things a lot more often, and that's aggregation of data, right? So sometimes we aggregate data, and then we got to aggregate across a set of dimensions, and then we lose a whole lot of value, right? So the core data, we then go and aggregate it across, let's say, for example, regions, and then we lose gender. or we lose other important attributes. And there you get data that's cleaned off the table. You get value that's cleaned off the table, and people can't use it anymore. And it's the same thing that we constantly share. When you have, the data lakes or the situation on read, schema on read or schema on write. And we all know when we do ETL stuff, when we get data from external, we then do a ETL work and we take out the data that we don't need and we put it into the database and we throw away the data that we have now finished processing. Now, in some cases, we don't always know what those other fields are. And because we've reduced the amount of data, we've lost value on the data set. And this is what the data value chain can pick up on, is if you try to quantify the value of the data along the chain and along the movement, you'll quickly pick up either you improving the value, or you decreasing the value. And that when you have people that are focused on value, you're now developing assets, and you can quickly pick up the difference between an asset and a liability. I think I've said too much, Johan.
Actually, yes, I would actually just a quick thing on what you've said and looking at this outcome, because, well, because I'm always a devil's advocate, but in this instance, what about because if you look at this slide and you say actually provide insight into which data generates value, is this not maybe where machine learning and very good machine learning algorithms can actually now be pushed into this part and actually start doing machine learning in a way to actually enhance the benefit for the business?
Yes. So there's actually and I'll actually show you. I'll just jump along here quickly, where we are now getting into the world of digital decisioning. Where am I now? Sorry, I'm battling with my mouse. Okay. So when we look at some of the areas, and this is just some more information on data catalogs, and there's a nice example of a data catalog that talks about the data lineage and how important the data lineage is to a data catalog over and above just the data assets. So guys, please don't think that you've got a data catalog that doesn't have data flows and business processes associated. There's quite a bit more in that flow. But the one I wanted to get to explain to you, Jan, sorry, I'm making you guys dizzy. So one of the papaya rules that we have, or one of the papaya issues, is this one that's got, can you see the risk weighting is a 4? And this is one specifically for Arthur, that when you enhance personal information using AI, you've got this increased risk that you're developing. So with this amazing stuff where you can add extra information and you can associate it and enhance what you understand about the customer with other data, and especially other data from third parties, your risk is increasing dramatically. But certainly that's what people are doing with AI and machine learning, is finding links between data elements so that you can enhance the value. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, Howard, just on that, so are you going in the direction where, from a governance point of view and a risk point of view, like say, like let's say, I don't want to get old cows, but say, the first when actually Donald Trump was actually sort of elected, where that company in the UK, I'm not sure of their name, is where they took these Facebook data, things like that. So they were doing very good machine learning language.
Yes,
machine learning language was actually kind of illegal. Okay, and so is that where you're going with this?
No. What I'm saying is you start to introduce what's called a privacy by design. So your privacy impact assessment is when you first of all come up with a cunning plan that you want to enhance this data. Somebody's got to have a look at it and say, are we going to affect anybody? Are we exposing the risk? What's our risk appetite? And we then make the appropriate decision, but it's documented. And we do the same with ethics. So I'm certainly not suggesting is let's restrict the data, let's restrict our lives to not have any data or any automated processing. We're saying that when you're doing it and you've assessed the risk and you design ethics and privacy into the models and into the approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can we concur, because the conditions need to obviously, and you need actually to do it in a way, or the justification could be you enhancing a legitimate business purpose. So if it's about maybe operational efficiencies, I don't think that you would have actually have sort of transgressed any of the rules, particularly Popeye in this case.
Yeah, and Johan, I'd share with you one day, there's a lovely ethical framework, and they basically say, they segment it into these different areas and saying, in this situation, we have a high potential for an ethical violation, therefore don't touch it and find other ways of dealing with it. And I really liked Lego's approach, where, for example, they were being pushed to bring social media into the Lego tools, and they rejected it. Now, the interesting thing is they're dealing with kids, so they've got even a bigger issue. But they refused to allow what they sold to be related to the social environment, okay? Because they knew the possibility of something going wrong and hurt being caused to the kids was massive. And so they just said, we're not going to do it like this, we're going to go in another direction. And the benefit about that thinking is sometimes it brings out innovative ideas on dealing with issues.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Actually, that look, I'm delving into something which I don't really. I'm interested, but thanks.
So always good to work with your risk people, make them aware of it. It's that change management to say, guys, this is the problems we can cause. And I'll share with you, Paul, have we got enough time to tell another story? Or
No, let's one more, and then I think we
okay,
wrap it up. Thanks, Art.
So ethics and privacy is hard, and we mustn't expect that all of us understand the unethical or the situation where we expose our customers. And I'll give you an example where I was brought onto a board as the ethics officer, and we were having a discussion, and someone mentioned something, and somebody else turned around and said, that's unethical. And I was blown away by the fact that I didn't even see it. I didn't even recognize it. So this change that we have to bring, that we allow all our employees, because they see what we're doing with data, not always the management. It's the employees that start to see this relationship. And they're the ones that need to be there and expose and allow that discussion to happen and allow the risk people to get involved in that discussion. So we got a lot of work to help educate our people.
Great. Thank you, Howard. If you won't mind, Howard, please just bring up the last slide in Menti. It's just really a courtesy to ask the group, did we meet expectation and answer questions? And if not, could we just get some feedback on that so we could possibly set up a follow-up? But also, just something that I didn't ask in that question, I didn't think about, have been stirred in each person listening as we were going through the presentation. There might be questions, and as the presentation proved, questions started coming quite fast and furiously, which was awesome. But there may be some burning questions that we could take away and look into preparing for future webinars, or just releasing some commentary on LinkedIn, etc. for that.
No, that's helpful. We can answer some of those questions on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So if you would mind on Menti just answering that question, and yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to meet. It might be new that came
and
up.
Also just to, well, maybe to add on that is if they would, we are part of that group on LinkedIn. If anyone wants us to talk or discuss a certain area like data ethics or taxonomies, ontologies, knowledge graph, let's contribute on the LinkedIn and we can plan something.
Thank you for that one. Right, thanks everybody. Howard, once again, thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you, Veronica, for your input. It was excellent up front, setting the framework or the foundation to the discussion. And thank you to everybody else that contributed and asked questions, contributed. Johan, thank you. Arthur, thank you. Esty, thank you. Christine, thanks very much. And for everybody else that participated and listened in. Until next time, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Hope you all have a great day. Great evening.